Whistle Creek, Montana, had exactly one saloon, one traffic light, and one rule that nobody had ever needed to write down. The saloon was called the Rusty Spur. The traffic light had been stuck on yellow since the Clinton administration. And the rule was about to get its first real test in 39 years. It was a Tuesday, which mattered, because Tuesday was when brewed the good coffee, the Colombian dark roast she hid behind
Trust
the
me, you're better
industrial
off not
sludge
knowing.
she served tourists. The jukebox in the corner worked through its usual liturgy of Johnny Cash, and beneath the bar's amber light, dust drifted like it had paid rent. A dozen old-timers occupied their usual perches, cracked leather booths, stools worn to the shape of specific spines, and at the corner table, alone, sat a man with a white beard and a brown corduroy jacket, holding a steaming cup with both hands the way some men hold prayer. His name was Dutch. He was 78 years old, and he was, at that moment, the most wanted being in the Milky Way galaxy. He blew gently across the surface of his coffee. Outside, the wheat went silver, then shadowed. The light from the windows dimmed as though God had leaned over the town to get a better look. Glasses trembled on their shelves. The jukebox skipped. Nobody looked up. Big Earl, hunched over the counter with forearms like Sunday hams, turned a page of his
21,
newspaper.
22, and
Martinez
cross.
counted a stitch, muttered, and kept knitting. The Dominion warship Inevitable Consequence over Whistle Creek at 2:14 p.m. 400 meters of obsidian hull and weapons arrays, and disgorged a single figure onto the cracked asphalt of Main Street. Commander Hal of the Dominion stood 7 feet of sinew and gunmetal skin, wrapped in battle leather, a bandolier of trophies crossing his chest. His eyes were black glass. 340 confirmed kills across 47 star systems had taught him that fear had a smell, and every world smelled of it eventually. He inhaled Earth's atmosphere, dust, diesel, something was frying, and found the fear notably absent. He logged this as a sensor error. Threat assessment, he murmured to the chrome sphere hovering at his shoulder. KLIK-7 chirped. 1 structure, 13 elderly organics. Average age, deceased adjacent. Recommendation, this is beneath you and I'd like to go home. The bounty is 10 million credits. The bounty is weird is what it is. Dead only. Do not converse with Target. Do not accept beverages from Target. Who writes that? Hal was already moving. He mounted the wooden steps, drew the revolver from his hip, the old Earth-made revolver, his father's trophy, the one artifact he carried that predated his own legend, and kicked the saloon doors open with theatrical force. The doors, being swinging doors, swung. Then they swung back and caught him across the shoulder plate with a crack that echoed off the ceiling fans. 13 heads did not turn. From somewhere near the bar, without urgency, a voice offered, "Doors got a return swing, son." Hal stood very still. On Prime, Hatchling sang songs of his entrances. He had breached a dreadnought through its exhaust manifold and emerged carrying its captain's helm. He straightened, recalibrated his dignity, and swept the room with the gaze that had ended negotiations on 9 worlds. He found his target immediately. Corner table, white beard, coffee. The intelligence file had contained almost nothing, no military record, no title, no known weapons. Only a designation, the coffee drinker of Sol 3, and a single appended note from the High Council, in the formal script reserved for treaties and funerals. He is the reason we do not speak of 1987. Hal crossed the floor. Boards groaned under him. He stopped beside the corner table, raised the revolver, and pressed its muzzle to the old man's temple with the ceremonial precision of an execution he had performed hundreds of times. Dutch did not flinch. He did not look up. He tilted his head a quarter inch, not away from the barrel but toward the window, and said mildly, "You're my light friend." Something happened then in Hal's chest that he had no word for. It was small, like a hairline crack in a viewport. He recited the words anyway because the words were what he had. Dutch of Sol 3, By decree of the High Council, your existence is hereby concluded. You may speak your death honor. My what now? Your final words, it is customary. Dutch appeared to consider this seriously. He took a sip of coffee with a gun against his skull. He took a sip and set the cup down on its saucer without a click. Well, if we're customs, you to tip works hard. Hal's translator hesitated. Tip, clarify. You leave a little extra for the service. Ah, the commander's black eyes narrowed. A dueling ritual then, a challenge of surplus, an offering to the war matron, primitive but he respected protocol. I accept your tip, human. I will honor it after your death. Somewhere behind him, quietly, money changed hands. He didn't notice. He was watching the old man's face, waiting for the moment they all gave him, the moment the eyes did what eyes do at the end, widen, plead, break. 340 times he had watched it. It was the moment that made him what he was. Dutch's eyes were the pale, patient blue of a January sky, and they were doing none of those things. They were doing something else entirely, something Hal's combat instincts identified half a second before his mind could refuse it. They were forgiving him in advance. KLIK-7's threat scanner, which had spent 40 seconds insisting the room contained 13 harmless organics, abruptly began recompiling. Big Earl folded his newspaper, set down her knitting, needles crossed just so. Down the bar, a man everyone called Pastor Mike cracked his knuckles, and the sound was wrong, too deep, like ice shifting on a lake. The scanner's display flickered through classifications, gave up on numbers, and rendered a single word in blinking crimson. Run. Commander, KLIK-7 said, in a voice Hal had never heard it use. Commander, the revolver. What about it? Scan the grip. There's an engraving under the wrap. It's Commander, it's in. Hal did not look down. He could not look down because the old man had finally turned his head, unhurried, and was looking up the barrel at him, past the barrel, through it, at him, as if the gun were a screen door between neighbors, and the old man was smiling. Not the smile of the doomed. The smile of a man watching a familiar storm roll in over land he'd already paid for. Behind Hal, in perfect and terrible unison, 12 chairs scraped back from 12 tables. Dutch leaned in close, close enough that his breath fogged the gunmetal, and whispered the last words the Dominion's greatest hunter would ever hear on the subject of easy prey. Fool, you picked the wrong table. The silence lasted 3 heartbeats. Hal knew, because he counted his own, a hunter's habit, and somewhere between the second and third, he understood that every rhythm in the room had synchronized to the old man's. 13 humans breathing in time. Even the jukebox seemed to be waiting. You know, Dutch said, conversationally, gun still at his temple, 1987 was a Tuesday too. The word 1987 moved through the saloon like weather. Hal had read the file, of course, what little of it the council permitted anyone to read. Officially, there had been no invasion of Sol 3. Officially, no expeditionary force had descended on the North American continent in the human year 1987. Officially, the Dominion had never lost anything anywhere to anyone, but every soldier knew the shape of the redacted pages. Every cadet had heard the whispers of the silent war, 6 days that ended with the greatest fleet in 3 galaxies limping home, and a new designation stamped onto Sol 3's file in ink the color of arterial blood, Class Omega. Do not engage. They enjoy it. I was 39, Dutch went on, addressing his coffee more than his executioner. Hauling freight through Nebraska. Middle of the night, this light comes down over the interstate like the good Lord dropped a chandelier. He smiled at the memory the way other men smiled at wedding photos. Your scout ship set down right across Route 80. Fella got out, looked a lot like you, matter of fact, and started disintegrating my cargo. $40,000 of frozen ground beef gone. Now I'm a patient man. But I was hauling for a fella who breaks thumbs, and Bond was on the radio, and something in me just... He made a small gesture, like a man releasing a bird. Let go. You attacked a scout vessel, Hal said. with a cargo hauler. Attack's a strong word. I merged into it, aggressively. A sip. Your shields ain't rated for 80,000 pounds of Ford and grievance, turns out. And your ship computers, he chuckled, low and warm, your ship computers plug into wall current if you're stubborn enough. Melted a Radio Shack microwave doing it, but I cooked that navigation core like a hot pocket. Your commander surrendered to me in a cornfield at 4 in the morning. Polite fella once you got past the screaming. KLIK-7 made a sound like a fax machine having a religious experience. Commander, cross-referencing, the Nebraska incident is real. He's the redaction. He's all the redactions. Hal's arm had not moved. 340 kills, and his arm had never once trembled, and it was not trembling now, and he was having to think about it, which had never before been true. One lucky night, he said, does not survive 39 years. No, agreed a new voice, vast and unhurried from the bar. But we do. Big Earl rose from his stool like a continent achieving self-awareness. 6'5", hands like catcher's mitts, a face that had been described in classified documents as load-bearing. He set his newspaper down beside a half-eaten slice of cherry pie. Earl, demolitions, Task Force Roadhouse 85 to 91, 3 motherships. He nodded at the pie. These days I judge the county fair. It's more competitive. Martinez. The knitting woman didn't stand. She simply let the light catch her needles, which were, Hal's optics now informed him, machined from Starship hull alloy. Overwatch, 1,200 meters crosswind through a viewport the size of a dinner plate. She resumed her stitch. I make sweaters now. Everybody gets one eventually. Down the bar, the man called Pastor Mike said nothing at all. He just smiled, gently, the way you'd smile at a lost lamb. And Hal's targeting system, hardware that had stared down war titans without complaint, quietly deleted his threat profile rather than finish calculating it. Task Force Roadhouse, Hal repeated. The name surfaced from the deepest redactions like a body from a lake. The council said you disbanded. We retired, Dutch corrected. There's a difference. Disbanded means gone, retired means Tuesdays. He gestured around the room with his cup. First Tuesday of every month, 39 years running. Coffee's good, Earl brings pie, and we keep an eye on the sky, force of habit. The pale eyes came back to Hal, and for the first time they cooled 1 degree like a door easing shut. So you see the situation, son. You didn't walk into a bar, you walked into a reunion. Hal did what legends do when the ground moves. He fired. He was fast, genuinely, galactically fast. Fast enough that on any other world the story would have ended there. But Dutch had started tilting his head when Hal's tendon first whispered against the trigger, an economy of motion so small it looked like disagreement, and the round passed through the space where legend met fact and detonated the jukebox's 45 rack in a spray of vinyl. A single black disc, the mystery single, the one nobody admitted to loading, spun across the floor and wobbled to rest. The saloon observed a moment of profound silence. He shot Rick, said from behind the bar in the tone coroners use. What happened next, Hal would later describe to a tribunal as a localized collapse of physics, and the tribunal would note that he was being generous to physics. Earls caught him across the chest plate like a wrecking ball with opinions. He rolled, came up, drew his plasma blade, and found it lassoed out of his grip by who had apparently been knitting a lariat. The room became weaponized Americana, pool cues cracking off his shoulder guards, a dartboard frisbeed with unsettling accuracy, the mechanical bull somehow unbolted and employed. Through all of it, 13 elderly humans moved with the unhurried certainty of people who had done this before, to worse, in the dark, in space. And through all of it, Dutch never left his chair. He leaned, he tipped. Once, as Hal charged him in a last honor-blind rush, the old man simply extended one boot, read the specials board over the alien's descending head, and let 7 feet of apex predator introduce itself to the floorboards. The coffee, throughout, maintained a surface like glass. It ended with duct tape. It usually did, Earl explained, tapping. Duct tape was humanity's first diplomacy. Hal came to rest fixed upright against the wounded jukebox, arms pinned, trophies dangling, dignity somewhere back in the wheat fields, and the jukebox, dying, vengeful, chose that moment to resurrect its last surviving track. A synthesizer line burbled up. A voice, cheerful beyond all mercy, promised that it would never give him up, nor indeed let him down. "For the record," KLIK-7 said, from the bar where had given it nachos, "I advised against literally all of this." But Hal was no longer listening to the machine, or the music, or even to the fear, and there it finally was, the fear, his own, unfamiliar as a stranger's coat. He was looking at his revolver lying on the floorboards where Lariat had flung it, its grip wrap split open along the seam. Beneath the leather, worn soft by a hand that was not his, ran a line of engraved script, his father's ceremonial hand. He could read it from here, and he read it 4 times because it refused to mean what it meant. "To the one who let me live, the table is always open. DC." "Where," Hal said quietly, "did my father get this gun?" Dutch's face changed then, the first true movement it had made all day. The granite patience cracked, and underneath it was something old and sad and gentle, and infinitely more frightening than anything the room had done to him. "Son," the old man began, "I think you'd better sit." The bandolier across Hal's chest was already pooling crimson. His heart sank as he understood. Not a weapon. The beacon, triggered automatically by the drop in his vitals, screaming his humiliation into the dark between stars, a Dominion honor protocol older than mercy and impossible to recall. The windows lit white. Above the wheat fields of Whistle Creek, Montana, in a silence that pressed on the ears like deep water, 200 warships of the Retribution fleet tore holes in the afternoon sky, and every gun on every one of them swung down toward a saloon where an old man sighed, looked into his cup, and found it, for the first time in 39 years, empty. The voice arrived before the demand did, broadcast on every frequency Earth owned, rattling car radios and baby monitors and the rusty Spurs ancient television, which had shown nothing but rodeo reruns since 2011. It was a woman's voice, if glaciers were women, Grand Admiral of the Dominion, and she pronounced each human syllable like she was stepping over something dead. "People of Sol 3, you harbor the being designated the coffee drinker. Surrender him within 1 planetary hour, or learn why the galaxy does not speak of us in the past tense." Humanity received this ultimatum in its own particular way. The governments of Earth convened emergency sessions, drafted statements, and panicked with tremendous procedural discipline. The people of Earth, meanwhile, began arriving in Whistle Creek with lawn chairs and coolers, parking their trucks along Route 12 to watch. Within 40 minutes there was a funnel cake stand. Las Vegas, moving with the reflexes of a true predator, posted a line, "Fleet 3000, Grandpa plus 5000. A cable news chyron crawled beneath footage of the hovering armada. Alien Armada DEMANDS local Grandpa. Grandpa, FINISHING his coffee. Inside the saloon, the Grandpa in question set down his empty cup and stood. It was, Hal thought from his duct-taped vantage against the jukebox, the single most alarming thing he had witnessed all day, and the day had featured Pastor Mike. Dutch, rising from his chair, had the tectonic inevitability of a drawbridge, and when he was fully upright the whole room seemed to reorganize itself around him, the way iron filings confess to a magnet. Dutch said, "Phone." She set it on the bar, black, rotary, its cord a lazy spiral, and Hal watched the old man dial with one finger, the disc grinding backward after every number like a small, stubborn planet. "What is that device?" Hal said. "Is it a weapon?" "Worse," said KLIK-7, who had been on Earth's internet for an hour now. "It's a landline. It can't be jammed, traced, or reasoned with, like him." The number Dutch dialed was carved into the bar top, under the varnish, and had been since 1991. Somewhere beneath Cheyenne Mountain, a piece of equipment that 3 successive administrations had tried to decommission, and been talked out of by men who wouldn't say why, began to ring. And across the planet, pagers woke up. Pagers in tackle boxes and sock drawers, and one in a jar on a mantel in Tulsa marked in case. A retired surgeon in Phoenix looked at his beeping hip, then at his half-finished bypass patient and told the anesthesiologist, "He's stable. Keep him under. I have a reunion." "Roadhouse," Dutch said into the receiver, "is back open." The hour granted them died at 3:14 p.m., and her dropships came down through the clouds like judgment, sleek black seeds scattering armored infantry across the wheat. What rose to meet them was not an army. Armies, the war codices had 1,000 pages on. There was no page for this. Crop dusters, 4 of them, flown by septuagenarians in aviator sunglasses, stitched the sky with chemical fog that gummed optics into blindness, banking away in formation to a chorus of whooping that translators rendered inadequately as joy. Took the water tower with her knitting bag and began her old arithmetic. Wind, distance, breath, stitch, and shock troopers a mile apart dropped mid-stride, wrapped at the ankles, cocooned. Big Earl had converted the county fair's pie catapult in under 20 minutes, and his cherry rhubarb ordnance proved concussive, blinding, and per one captured trooper's official statement, deeply confusing on an emotional level. And at the drive-in on the edge of town, the boys aimed the great white screen at the heavens and played Independence Day at full projection brightness. The fleet's analysts, intercepting it, classified the film as an official military broadcast and briefly recommended full retreat. But the moment the town would talk about for the rest of its collective life, the moment the funnel cake line went silent, came when the drop commander, 9 feet of servo-armored elite, strode through the chaos to the saloon porch and found Dutch waiting on the steps, hands empty, corduroy jacket buttoned against the wind. "High noon was 3 hours ago," Dutch said, "but I'm flexible." The commander raised an arm cannon the size of a mailbox. Dutch didn't move. He just looked past the armor at the seams of it and started talking not to the pilot, to the suit. "Now I figure you run about 10,000 combat cycles a year," he said, gently, the way you talk a colt out of a fence. "No leave, no pension. Nobody's ever once asked how you're holding up." A red sensor eye flickered, listening. "Here's what retirement looks like, friend. Casserole on Sundays, a garage with your name on it. I'll knit you a cozy for your reactor housing." A pause. "Everybody gets one eventually." There was a hydraulic sound like a long-held sigh. The battlesuit's chest plate unlocked itself, decanted its shrieking pilot onto the porch steps, and settled beside Dutch with the ancient contentment of a dog changing owners. Overhead, aboard the flagship Inevitable Consequence, Grand Admiral watched the telemetry of her invasion dissolve into pie filling and yarn, and felt something her bloodline had not felt in 11 generations. She rejected it. She reached instead for the console her ancestors had installed for arguments exactly this lost, flipped back the crimson cowling, and laid her hand on the Planet Cracker's ignition rune. "Aunt," Hal's voice, patched through from the surface taped to a jukebox, past all dignity and therefore past all fear. "Aunt, listen to me. The coffee drinker, the file is a lie. I found Father's gun. I found what's written on it. Your father," said, "died a hero of the silent war. Father died in bed telling me stories about a cornfield." The words came up out of Hal like something long swallowed. He wasn't defeated in Nebraska. He was spared. And he spent the rest of his life trying to tell the council that, and the council spent the rest of his life redacting him. Why do you think the bounty says do not converse with target? They're not afraid we'll kill anyone, Aunt. They're afraid he'll talk. Silence, orbital and absolute. On the porch below, Dutch stood in the wind with his empty hands and his emptied cup, watching the sky the way he'd watched it every first Tuesday for 39 years, like a man waiting on a neighbor who owed him a visit. His hand trembled on the rune. 11 generations of doctrine pressed down on it. 1 hour, nephew, she said, so quietly the bridge crew pretended not to hear. I will give you 1 hour to prove it. And if you cannot, The rune flared crimson under her palm, and 200 ships' guns woke together, bathing the wheat fields in targeting light. I will finish what 1987 started. They cut Hal down from the jukebox with a pocket knife and a certain ceremony, and Dutch led him to the corner table, where set down 2 cups without being asked. The alien stared at his. Do not accept beverages from Target. Your father sat right there, Dutch said. 4 in the morning, Nebraska, October of '87. Youngest commander in the fleet, bleeding green all over my passenger seat, waiting for me to finish him. That's the custom, he told me. The victor concludes. The old man turned his cup a slow quarter turn. I gave him coffee instead. Worst thing I ever did to him, judging by his face. Then I gave him my sidearm, grip first, and I told him the table's always open, and I let him walk back to that cornfield and go home. The council called it the Silent War, Hal said, because no one who came home would talk about it. No, son. Dutch's voice went soft as flannel. They called it silent because everyone who came home tried to talk about it, your daddy loudest of all. A fleet can survive losing a battle. What it can't survive is finding out the enemy was kind. He nodded at the revolver on the table between them. That's why the bounty's on me and not this whole planet. I'm not a threat. I'm a witness. Hal picked up his father's gun, split the grip wrap the rest of the way, and found what a dying man had hidden beneath 39 years of leather. A data sliver, thin as a communion wafer. His father's personal logs. His father's voice. He carried it to the porch and broadcast it to 200 ships on the Honor Channel. No officer could lawfully mute. This is Commander Hal, recorded in defiance of Council seal, said a voice Hal had last heard telling him bedtime stories. On Sol 3 I was defeated, disarmed, and shown mercy by a hauler of frozen beef. The Council fears these humans because they fight like madness itself. They are wrong. Fear them because they forgive like it too. If you are hearing this, my son found the table. Sit down at it, all of you, before someone makes us burn it. Across the fleet, gunnery crews stood back from their consoles. Whole decks went quiet. On the flagship bridge, Grand Admiral heard her brother's voice for the first time in 30 years, and her hand, 11 generations of doctrine bearing down on it, stayed pressed to the ignition rune, trembling, because doctrine was all that stood between her and grief. Doctrine won by a muscle's width. The rune flared. Forgive me, brother, she whispered, and fired the planet cracker anyway. The beam came down out of the sky like the wrath of arithmetic, a column of annihilating white a half-mile wide, aimed at a saloon in Montana. The lawn chair crowd screamed. The funnel cake stand was abandoned at last. And Dutch, standing alone on the porch steps, raised his coffee cup. 39 years, he told it apologetically. You kept my coffee warm. Time to earn your keep. He thumbed the chip in the ceramic the chip had scolded him about since the Bush administration, and the cup opened like a flower, unfolding into a lattice of humming alien geometry. The harmonic containment core he'd pulled out of a mothership's heart in 1987 and carried to coffee hour every first Tuesday since. Because you never know. The beam struck the lattice and inverted. Light ran backward up its own column, a river revering, and poured itself politely back into the inevitable consequence, where it unwound every system on the ship, weapons, engines, doctrine, and left, with what witnesses swore was deliberate humor, only life support and the karaoke machine. 200 ships watched their flagship drift dark and gently rotating, broadcasting an open microphone, and eventually, a junior ensign's terrified rendition of On a Prayer. The fleet surrendered at 4:51 p.m. in Vegas. A retired mailman named Gus, the only human being on Earth who had bet Grandpa wins without spilling, fainted onto a payout of 5,000 to 1. Review of the footage confirmed the terms. Through beam, inversion, and apocalypse, the coffee had not spilled. There had been no coffee. Dutch had timed the end of the world to the bottom of his cup. Came down by shuttle at sunset, unarmored, carrying her brother's revolver like something holy, and found the humans had not built her a tribunal. They'd built her a cookout. She stood rigid at the edge of the firelight until Dutch pressed a plate into her hands, Earl's brisket, cornbread, and said the only terms Earth would ever demand. Treaty gets signed in the saloon, and your people learn to tip. They did on both counts. 6 months later, the Galactic Accord of Whistle Creek was at the corner table, under a framed and bullet-trick single, with KLIK-7 running the jukebox and Ambassador Hal Bolo Tai, strong opinions about smoke rings, signing beneath his father's engraved words. And in every fleet academy in the Spiral Arm, cadets now learned one rule before they learned to fly: beware the quiet ones. They have finished their coffee. Which is why, on a Tuesday the following spring, the whole bar sighed as some young mercenary shoved through the swinging doors, took the return swing across the jaw, and leveled a disruptor at a small old lady doing the crossword by the window. The regulars didn't even stand, poured a fresh cup for afterward, unhurried, measured him for a sweater. The little old lady filled in 7 across, looked up over her glasses with eyes like patient winter, and smiled the smile of land already paid for. "Fool," she said, "you picked the wrong table."